Indomitable Heart by Genet. Chapter 15. Jango quietly told Miles, Silas, and his other close friends about the pregnancy in person. For Arla, he had to satisfy himself with a secure holocall to break the news. Arla laughed herself silly, especially since when Jango had learned she was dating again, he'd driven her nuts, reminding her to be careful. Miles and Silas were more than a little surprised. Less by Jango's desire to carry to term, or even the fact that a being who presented as male physically and socially was pregnant, and more because of the timing. They understood that Jango might not have chosen the time, but he would do his best to protect the pregnancy. They volunteered to pass on the word to the rest of command and through the ranks of the loyal veterans of the clan, which meant, of course, that it seemed the whole army knew, in short order. Jango soon couldn't go anywhere without tripping over an ARC trooper or two, and it didn't take him long to realize he was being guarded. The only thing that kept his temper in check at being so coddled was the fact that they were just as protective of Obi-Wan. As the pregnancy progressed, Jango settled into quarters in the Jedi Temple, running the war from the secure communications center there. He didn't like being out of the field, but it was a compromise he was more than willing to make. So he went to his appointments with the Jedi healers as scheduled, ate according to his prescribed diet, and didn't engage in training that ran the risk of bodily contact. There were some benefits, Jango supposed. Primary among them was that Baba lived full-time with him and Obi-Wan, although he spent his days playing in the creche or attending lessons with the Jedi younglings. Baba introduced his boar to many aspects of temple life that Jango had never considered. While he knew Obi-Wan had been raised in a youngling clan, nostalgic stories hadn't quite illustrated how warm and loving creche life was, how younglings of similar ages were allowed to grow and play and learn together. In truth, Jango had never had much chance to learn about the Jedi as a culture, or even to spend much time with Obi-Wan's friends. They had usually met up when Obi-Wan was on missions, rather than Jango coming to Coruscant, and Obi-Wan's stories couldn't teach Jango about his whole culture during those visits. Jango had read over the information the Kaminoans had provided on the Jedi, the prominent members of the Order and their skills, but not wholly trusted it. Not wholly trusted them. Now, with Jango and Obi-Wan living together, Obi-Wan's friends came by with some regularity or joined them when they ate in the refectory for meals, and Jango could easily see that they really were a family, and one not that much more politely mannered than Jango's. Anakin was one of their most frequent guests when he was on planet, although he wasn't in the temple often. As a newly risen knight, Anakin was slogging his way through his first solo missions, learning how best to apply Obi-Wan's teachings when his master wasn't there at his side. Despite Obi-Wan's best attempts, Anakin was no diplomat, and his missions tended to see him attached to Explorer Corps outposts, mapping wild space and the unknown regions, or protecting monarchs and senators of vulnerable worlds and other important persons. It was through his skills as a protection specialist that Anakin met Padme Amidala Naberi, former Queen of Naboo and current public relations specialist for the refugee relief movement. That non-governmental organization had become even more instrumental since the start of the war, working with Senate, Jedi, and military alike to facilitate the safe migration of war-torn populations to and from both Separatist and Republic worlds. Padme's visibility, though, meant opponents of the RRM's mission focused on her, and her personal guard no longer felt up to the task of ensuring her safety. As the former protege of Senator Palpatine, he called on the Jedi to protect her. With the Jedi spread so thin by galaxy-wide conflict, such requests were not always filled. The goals of the refugee relief movement were altruistic and the former queen well regarded, so the directive to protect Amidala was given priority and Anakin was sent to play bodyguard. His first call back to Obi-Wan consisted mostly of complaints about how very obstinate Padme was. Obi-Wan and Jango, remembering that trait well, simply laughed and asked Anakin to pass on their greetings. Upon learning Anakin had been Obi-Wan's Padawan, Padme became slightly more tractable. By then, though, Anakin was already smitten with her righteous anger and vehemence. Recognizing the symptoms well, Obi-Wan gently talked Anakin through his initial panic. Love, Obi-Wan knowingly reminded Anakin, was not the same thing as attachment. So long as Anakin could set aside his feelings for Padme and act as a Jedi, There was nothing barring a romantic relationship between them. Of course, all of that was predicated on Padme returning Anakin's regard. Tales of the romancing of Padme became Obi-Wan and Jango's chief amusement before long. It was a bright spot in the continuing conflict that engulfed the Republic. The war escalated despite Jango and the Gar's best efforts. By Jango's 7th month of pregnancy, there was no hiding his condition, and he was followed everywhere by a gaggle of nervous clones, including at least one medic. Obi-Wan tended to find Jango's shadows adorable and the situation hilarious, and did absolutely nothing to impede the attempts at cuddling. The troopers took Obi-Wan's encouragement of their obsession with Jango and the baby's safety as permission to fuss over Obi-Wan as well. That Obi-Wan enjoyed slightly less, although he happily took under his wing any trooper that stood still too long in his presence, treating them all more or less like senior Padawans, and dispensing advice of varying usefulness. As Jango's official Jedi liaison, Obi-Wan was more or less temple-bound himself, although he took occasional trips to Kamino to retrieve the Force-sensitive clones as they were identified. Once on Coruscant and weaned off the hormone-supplemented Kamino rations, their aging slowed to human normal, and they joined the crush as initiates. Jango found himself spending a lot of time with them when he wasn't hip-deep in strategy planning, or supply requisitioning, or after-action reports. Spending time in the creche allowed Jango to better understand Obi-Wan's perspective on communal child-rearing, although he still wasn't sure how he felt about allowing someone else to be the primary caregiver for his child. That was a concern for later. He still had a couple months of pregnancy left and a war to win. Still, they did talk about the child and what they wanted for them. Both Obi-Wan and Jango agreed their Ik'aad would grow up with a raisonner as Jango had. Obi-Wan was happy to point out all the benefits of Jedi training, Jedi culture, too, and Jango did his best to keep an open mind. The first few years, at least, the baby would be in their custody, and while Jango accepted that a certain amount of training would be needed if they were Force-sensitive, Obi-Wan was more than capable of that level of education. After that, they would have a decision to make. They decided early on that the gender of the child was unimportant. Not only would they adore the child regardless, but the Mando'a language wasn't the only part of Mando culture where gender was irrelevant. Jango had adopted male pronouns when speaking basic simply because it made his life easier when interacting with outsiders, and Bubba had followed suit, wishing to emulate Jango in all things. When the new baby was older, they would choose gendered pronouns if they wished, but like most Mando young, their child would grow up using they-them in basic. Obi-Wan and Jango discussed the birth plan in detail, too. A surgical delivery would be required, and so they talked at length about when that should be scheduled and what it would entail. And in the quiet of their apartment, Jango and Obi-Wan began to think about names.
So, how does naming work on Studium?
Jango asked one night, sipping at his shig while the babe played Meshgeroya with his organs.
It's technically a full pot name,
Obi-Wan said from the kitchenette, where he was tidying up the dishes from their meal.
Birth clan name, given name, Baba's birth clan name, Sire's birth clan name. So if my parents had lived with my mother's clan after they married, I would be Ken-Wan Kenobi. My father's name was Obi-Ter-Obi-Obi. My mother was Kenan Kerken. There are also honorary names, so if you're accomplished in martial arts, you can add a title. If you're an accomplished musician, you add a different title, and so forth. I'm guessing that's not how it works on Concord Dawn?
No, Jango huffed out with a smile.
First name is chosen by your parents. Second name is your house. The family you can't choose, although once you're older you can disavow them. Different members of the same house might support different clans, although generally whole houses will be under a single clan's protection, and some of the houses that have been very powerful for a very long time have clans of the same name.
Like Clan and House Chris, Obi-Wan remembered, entering the common area, and Jango grimaced but nodded.
I'm perfectly fine with using the Mando naming conventions,
he sat at Jango's side.
Does Jango have significance? I've been told Stujoni tended to reuse particular given names within clans and family lines, so my father's grandfather was also a Wan, but his full name was Obi-Wan Obi-Obi. I don't know if there's meaning to the name beyond that. Jango's a Concord Dawn name, more than a Mando name, Jango said. "It means something along the lines of hut or unformed metal in the Concord Don dialect of Mando'a, and it's not really used outside the Fets and some of the more closely intermarried families. Mostly we name for people and things that are important to us. Bubba's name means lucky, and that it's usually a nickname, but it seemed to fit. Allah's name is more common, but if it means something specific, I don't know what." "I'd like the Ik'aad to be a Fett," Obi-Wan said thoughtfully. "The Sturgioni conventions don't really apply since I don't live among their clans, and I'd like the Ik'aad to have that title while people." Jango smiled, as always pleased by the reminder that Obi-Wan had chosen to become Mando, and chosen him. Given all the bad news that seemed to inundate them lately, reminders of such things were doubly nice.
"Would it be too soon to name them after Yon?"
Jango asked one night, returning to their ongoing conversation about naming the Ik'aad, and Obi-Wan smiled, the expression a bit wobbly.
"No, not too soon at all," Obi-Wan said gruffly. I wouldn't want that name to be Yon in entirety, but something to honor him. That would be lovely."
Jango pulled Obi-Wan down so he could press a soft kiss to his forehead.
"Gonna?"
Jango offered after a few moments' thought. Gray. It aptly summed up Yon in both appearance and philosophy, Obi-Wan thought, as he hummed in consideration.
"Mird,"
Obi-Wan countered, the root of both the verb to think and the adjective clever, intelligent. They went back and forth over many nights, tossing out and reconsidering names, mostly Mando, although some came from other cultures they had encountered over the years. Some were just pleasurable to say or hear, others had meaning they associated with Yon. Wise, intelligent, brave, stubborn. Their discussions about their child were a welcome balm against the horrors of the ongoing war. The clones died by the thousands, tens and hundreds of thousands, despite Jango's best efforts to take their targets with minimal loss of life. Obi-Wan knew each death pained his redur, despite that there was no way for Jango to individually know even a fraction of his odd. Foremost among the Separatist generals was their supreme commander, a cyborg who called himself Grievous and had a deep and abiding hatred for the Jedi. Grievous was skilled at the large-scale planning of the war, and Jango soon learned to dread engaging with them. They traded victories back and forth, but even when the Gar gained its objective against Grievous, they took heavy casualties. It didn't help that even when it seemed like they had Grievous pinned, the cyborg would manage to escape fleeing to fight another day. In addition to the regular military of the Separatists, there were also myriad assassins and bounty hunters willing to hunt Jedi and Vode alike. An attack on an outlying Jedi temple resulted in a dead Master and Padawan pair and left surveillance footage that sent Obi-Wan's memory immediately back to Naboo and the first Sith he had faced. A many-horned warrior with dark facial markings calling for the deaths of the Jedi, the clones, and the hot Mando'a who made up much of the officer corps. Savage Opress. Zabrak. Possibly a Sith apprentice. Opress wielded a light staff in that distinctive shade of crimson that Obi-Wan alone among the Jedi had seen twice before. The slaughter of the two Jedi would have been more than enough to draw the Order's attention, but Savage soon appeared on the battlefield leading Separatist troops, making him a threat the Gar also wanted eliminated. When the Gar intelligence officers learned that the warrior was on the move, Obi-Wan was dispatched to see if he could track him. Quinlan Vos, his boyhood friend and an experienced shadow, was at his side, and a cadre of Jango's Alpha Arcs watched their backs. Of all the clones, the Alpha Arcs who had trained the most with Jango were the most capable at meeting Force users in head-on battle. There was already talk of some of their cadre being sent back to Kamino to help train more commandos alongside the hot Mando'a who had taken over the training corps there, but for the most part it was just talk. The army couldn't afford to take experienced men off the battlefield. Obi-Wan didn't particularly want to leave. By then, Jango was entering the 9th and final month of his pregnancy, and Obi-Wan wanted to be in the temple for his redur, not chasing across the galaxy after a ghost. But duty came first. They had agreed on that before they made their vows to one another, no matter how much it frustrated them at times. Obi-Wan's first obligation was to the Order and Jango's to the Mando'a. So Obi-Wan went, grumbling all the way, and on Jabim he faced Savage Opress for the first time. Savage was not as well trained as Maul had been, nor as powerful as the Moon they presumed to be the Sith Master. He was definitely a Darksider, though, a fierce fighter who sliced through their lines like a hot knife through butter. He looked like the first Sith, too, a zebrick with sharp black markings and a tall crown of horns. Obi-Wan and Quinlan met him head-on, his furious style reminding Obi-Wan of that fight on Naboo even more than the physical similarities. The same being, he was almost certain, had trained them. Obi-Wan met Savage's saber staff with his paired sabers, Quinlan providing support and the ARC troopers covering them. The rest of the battle raged around them, the Force roiling with pain and death. Despite that it had been some months since he was last on a battlefield, Obi-Wan was among the Jedi most experienced in such situations, having defeated one Sith, then faced another, and survived to tell the tale. Quinlan was shortly overwhelmed and had to drop back to mentally regroup. The ARC troopers covered him capably and still managed to pepper Uppress with shots to keep the Darksider a bit distracted. In the end, it was Uppress's own troops that were his downfall. The droid set off an explosion just as Obi-Wan force-pushed Savage back, and he was caught in the blast and thrown into the air. He impacted hard and lay still, chest rising and falling with a slow cadence of unconsciousness. Their attention now able to turn fully towards the clankers, the ARC troopers fired at will, turning the Separatist troops into so much scrap metal. Quinlan managed to wrestle a set of force-inhibiting binders onto Savage, and their small group retreated with their prisoner. They were bound for Coruscant, where the Jedi would take custody of Savage as a Darksider, and therefore subject to their authority. Jango, or more likely one of his seconds, would be present when Savage was interrogated to ensure that any strategically useful information went to the right places, but the Hot Mando'a, Senate, and Chancellery all agreed that rogue Force users would remain solely within the Jedi's purview. Judicial simply didn't have the ability to contain such a prisoner. Obi-Wan attempted interrogation a few times while they were in transit and mostly got obdurate silence for his efforts. Despite Uppress's recalcitrance, he did learn a few things. The Moon that Obi-Wan and the Hot Mando'a had fought on Naboo was the Sith Lord, and was the same Shadow Master Obi-Wan had theorized about as far back as his mission to Mandalore, sowing discord throughout the galaxy from behind the scenes for decades leading up to the current conflict. Opress hinted, too, that there was a Sith on Coruscant itself, the Sith Apprentice, working to unbalance the Republic from within. Savage didn't say anything about the ultimate goal of the Sith, but Obi-Wan can make a few good guesses. Dominion over the known galaxy and conquest of what was as yet unknown. Subjugation and suffering as they reveled in their every whim. Those seem to be the goals of every Sith recorded in the Jedi archives. It was a future Obi-Wan would fight with his every breath. The hint that there was a Sith on Coruscant, though, that made a few things seem a little more understandable. Obi-Wan wasn't the only Jedi who had thought the Senate made it surprisingly difficult to ensure that the clone troopers were recognized as fully sentient beings and deserving of rights and remunerations as such. The Senate had to be bullied into ensuring the troopers' recognition by Jango, who had reminded them rather graphically what tended to happen to the masters of slave armies. That list of massacres, in conjunction with the well-remembered horrors of the Mandalorian Crusades, had ensured the Senate did the right thing, if out of fear in many cases, rather than altruism. It shouldn't have been so difficult to get the Senate to honor the laws of the Republic, laws prohibiting slavery and full sentient cloning. But then numerous other laws had gone unenforced, or were only enforced when the outcry was too great to ignore. Unchecked corruption could only account for so much of the insidious lack of empathy the Senate seemed to display in recent years. Manipulation began to make more sense, weighed against the causes left unfunded and the aid requests left unfulfilled. As they hurtled toward Coruscant with their captive, Obi-Wan reported Savage's capture and their estimated time of arrival at Coruscant to both the Council and the Gar Command. He waited to share his suspicions about the Sith in person, not wholly convinced that there was a Sith in the Senate, but not wanting to wholly discard the idea either. It certainly didn't seem an idea outside the realm of the possible, which made it all the more troubling. He would have to speak with all of his contacts very carefully to see if any of them had noted something that might be of use. By the time they settled into their approach lane over the glittering Ik'aad of Coruscant, Obi-Wan had been gone for more than a month. Before Obi-Wan left on his mission, he and Jango had decided on the name Mira, clever and wise, in honor of Obi-Wan's late master, who had been so important to the both. The scheduled date for Jango's delivery had passed, and Obi-Wan knew from the text messages exchanged that Jango and their Ik'aad had come through well. They would hopefully be released from the Halls of Healing by the time Obi-Wan reached the temple, if everything had gone according to plan. Obi-Wan carefully kept his excitement tamped down as much as possible, trying to present a professional facade to Quinlan and the Vode who traveled with him. It didn't work at the slightest on Quinlan, who had known Obi-Wan since they were crush-slings, and the Vode could read Obi-Wan well enough that it was of little use there either. They all knew, too, just what had Obi-Wan so eager to be home. Despite his desire to go straight to Jango, Obi-Wan first delivered their prisoner to the Jedi Temple's detention levels with Quinlan, then went with him to report to the Council. Silas, who had been left in charge of the army while Jango was on leave, was there via holo since the mission had been assigned under the auspices of both the Jedi Order and the Guard. Obi-Wan shared the relevant information he had gleaned from Oppress's largely unhelpful interrogation so far. Only after Silas signed off did Obi-Wan share his beliefs that there was a Sith highly placed in the Senate, as it wasn't actionable intelligence the military could vet, only a suspicion pieced together from hints Savage had let slip and Obi-Wan's own observations. He would tell Jango, too, and let them decide how far that information needed to travel. It wouldn't do for the Sith to be alerted that the Jedi suspected their presence on Coruscant due to rumors in the military apparatus. Finally, the council session ended. Hungry, tired, and wanting to see his Radur and meet his Ik'aad, Obi-Wan messaged Jango's healer. Jango and their week-old child had been released from the Halls of Healing, Obi-Wan learned, and were settled in Obi-Wan's apartment. As they traversed the long hallways to the residential wing and his quarters within, it took every bit of Obi-Wan's will not to just break into a sprint. Obi-Wan paused outside his door. He took a deep breath and laid his hand on the reader, and the door quietly hissed open. Within, an unfamiliar voice was singing softly, a quiet tune ornamented with thrilling whistles. Stepping quietly inside, Obi-Wan found Jango and Baba on the sofa, Anakin sitting on the floor with his back to the sofa and Jango's hand carding gently through Anakin's hair. Jango glanced over as the door hissed closed behind Obi-Wan, smiling sleepily. Baba was utterly unconscious at his father's side, and the soft singing. Well, that was a Togruta with a well-swaddled infant nestled securely in her slender arms. The baby was clearly sleeping, little eyes shut, little mouth open, and blowing little spit bubbles. Obi-Wan was fairly certain he had never seen anything more precious. Not wanting to startle the Togruta holding his child, Obi-Wan quietly whistled the Togruta greeting he'd learned from Shakti when they were younger. The Togruta's head shot up sharply, and the jerky motion set a short string of silk beads swinging between their leku. Their face was striking, blue and white montrals and leku contrasting warm, burnt sienna skin with bright, pale markings. Prepubescent, Obi-Wan would guess from the soft roundness of their face and the length of their leku. They already wore a hunter's cool-tooth headband, and Obi-Wan would bet Shak had a hand in ensuring this hunter knew the ways of Togruta culture. "Orvode," Anakin greeted in a carrying whisper, clearly trying not to wake either Baba or the swaddled babe that rested in the Togruta's slender arms. "Sukuiga, Anakin," Obi-Wan greeted warmly, quite pleased to find his closest family together. Anakin stood, crossing to grab Obi-Wan by the forearms and bring their foreheads together in the Mando greeting. "Obi-Wan, this is Ahsoka Tano," Anakin introduced, fondness and excitement leaking from him. "She's my Padawan." Obi-Wan raised his eyebrows, a bit surprised Anakin had matched so young, not even a full year into his knighthood. He gave Ahsoka a warm smile, dipping his head in a more Jedi greeting. "Olarom," Obi-Wan said gently. "Welcome to our family. The armor is optional." She grinned broadly at that, displaying her fangs and giving him a low, slow blink of the eyes. Obi-Wan held her gaze and blinked back slowly, returning the Togruti extension of trust and welcome. "And this," Anakin said, and Obi-Wan held out his hands in silent request. Ahsoka silently obliged, handing the baby over with practiced care. Obi-Wan looked down into a small round face wrapped in pale sand-colored swaddling, skin still the flushed pink of very young children. Wispy dark curls peeked from beneath a knit cap, Master Goon's handiwork if Obi-Wan had to guess.
Omega.
Jango rasped sleepily, and Obi-Wan crossed to crouch beside the sofa, carefully shifting the little one so they could both look into their face.
This is Almira,
Jango introduced.
They're beautiful.
Obi-Wan choked out, his emotions roiling. He leaned into Jango, bringing Mira securely to his chest.
Jango,
he managed, and Jango swept a hand into his hair, pulling him closer yet.
Boba and Sokka have both been a big help,
Jango said softly, his hand rubbing gently against Boba's back where he lay tucked against Jango's side. Obi-Wan nodded, burying his face in the side of Jango's neck and weeping with pure, unadulterated joy to be home with them, his Ik'aad in his arms.